Hi, everybody. It's week 5, day 21. Can you believe that?
Day 21. Here we are already in the middle of April. I
I
can't believe
know.
it.
I know. So
So, over the weekend, you work in your notebook at all?
I did a little bit of work in my notebook and I did a lot of hiking with my kid and my husband. One of the things you can do here in the White Mountains is hike. So we went on 2. And yesterday's, it was this narrow path in an area that had snow. So we all wore our face masks because you're passing really close if somebody's coming. And we were probably 10% of the people in face masks. So that bothers me just a tad.
Oh, oh boy.
People need to be a little more careful than they're being.
Yeah.
What was cool though? I get to the top to this incredible lookout, Mount Willard, and there's this woman sitting there, and this girl has run off from her who's probably about 15. And finally she says, "You know why I'm here? Yesterday we lost my grandmother at 103, and this was her favorite place. So I'm
Mhm.
here with my granddaughter today to celebrate her."
Wow.
I was like, oh, that's beautiful.
There's a really
So,
nice piece in today's LA Times about how Yosemite has been closed. And because it's been closed now for a month, the animals are retaking the park.
oh,
Uh, and that if you were to walk through, you can't because it's closed, but if you could walk through Yosemite today, you would have seen Yosemite as it was in the 1800s. No cars. The bear population has quadrupled in the last month. So, and
wow.
all these different animals are now emerging, and they're just walking around where people normally are, and it's this whole crazy rebound of nature.
I don't know if you saw Sarah Ahmed's Twitter one day. She said that one thing she loved about this time was that the world is taking back. And she had pictures from Phuket, its beaches.
Mm.
Somebody had done all of these pictures of them just kind of being regenerated the way LA and other places have less pollution. And
Yes.
what does this
Yes.
all mean?
The air here is much clearer of
Yeah.
late. So, what are you doing in your notebook?
You know what? I was just looking back. The last time I sketched was the 5th. And so I really feel the absence of that as I look back over what I've been doing over the last week. And there are these long entries, mostly about life, about being in a quarantine. So
Mm,
I want that combination of art and words.
yeah, me too. I've been attracted lately in the last day or two on political cartoons.
Huh.
So, I've been looking for really rich political cartoons that not only will capture this moment, but who knows, in a subsequent unit could be analyzed by kids. I think part of next year may be, some sort of an argument unit of looking back at this time. And so I'm trying to, capture the moment as it happens, but I'm also always have that one teacher eye on what may come next as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you thought argument unit
Yeah.
because there's
Or,
so many different units that are
or
possible, right?
multi-genre or narrative, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
What are you reading?
So, okay, I have them. I read them both on my phone, so I have to show you pictures. Um, this writer, Lindy West, I don't know if you know her. So,
No.
Lindy West wrote Shrill, and the subtitle of Shrill is Notes from a Loud Woman. Subtitle of Lindy West, well, the title of Lindy West's new book is The Witches Are Coming. She is a badass feminist. She writes essays that just like blow your mind. She's a
Mm,
terrific writer. But Shrill became a series on Hulu, which my daughter and I are going to spin up and watch. She has been tormented by trolls. She's unapologetically out in so many ways. She won't be fat shamed by people. She won't be politically silenced. And so she has been off Twitter now for a year and a half. She said she had to for her own sanity. She spent so much time trying to block mean
mm,
people.
mm.
So it's powerful writing though, man. Keeps me working at it.
Wow. So, I don't know. I don't know if you saw Saturday Night Live this weekend, but they did it remotely, and what was kind of interesting was it was kind of a little peek into each of the cast members' homes because they all performed from their homes, And it got me to thinking about an old book. And I think this book is out of print, but I looked this morning and you can still buy used copies of it really cheaply on Amazon. But I was thinking in terms of the writer's desk.
I
Uh,
have that book down here.
yeah, yeah. And I
Yeah.
haven't looked at it for a long time, but we're all housebound. And these are photographs of writers through the generations. The book itself is about 25 years old, but even before that, like here's Kurt Vonnegut in 1994 sitting at his desk. And then next to it is a little reflection from the writer himself on, how his process. Here's a photo of Nikki Giovanni in 1975 in New York City. So sitting at her desk.
I
I
love it.
don't know. I just think it's a cool little book. It's called The Writer's Desk. And I thought it might serve as a little segue since we're going to talk about an element of writing today. And that is, we thought maybe we would kick around some thinking about the idea of conferring with young writers, sitting next to young writers. And I know that you and I have both talked a lot about this idea of trying to get teachers to see the difference, right, between hovering in a classroom, which is very different than conferring or coaching in a classroom. What are your thoughts? Where should we start this conversation?
Well, it's funny because I was observing a sixth grade teacher last month, and she said, you're going to have 25 minutes to write, and put the counter on the projector so the kids see up in front of the room, 20 minutes, counting down 1950. And that immediately stressed me out because when people do that, like I would be glancing at the clock, oh, well, there's only 8 minutes left. I'm not going to bother. It would be like this, like I think it would get in the way. But regardless of that, in the 25 minutes that I was in there, the kids are in rows and they all had projects, but she was going up and down the rows and just kind of like, yeah, you need to get to it. Or, oh, looks like you're working nice. And just that kind of talk. And to me, that's hovering. You never stop. You don't sit down next to a kid. And so what I told you I'd been thinking about was that hovering leads you to think about management. It's like the lens you're taking to your classroom is management. And after a few minutes, I just couldn't watch anymore. And I sat down next to a kid. I just kind of crouched down next to a kid and I said, hey, what are you working on? And he goes, well, I'm writing about skateboarding, right? Typical 12-year-old, right? I said, oh, really? So is it for somebody like me who doesn't skateboard? And he said, yeah. I said, oh, so that's a big topic. Like, how do you organize that? Because he has about a page of writing in front of him. He goes, well, I'm going to start with like all the equipment, and then I'm going to tell you all the moves that you can do. And so I'm like, oh, interesting, because I don't know the equipment and I don't know the moves. So those are things that I would need to know. I said, but when you do that, then how do you end it? And he like sits there for a minute and he looks at me and I'm like waiting, because, if you wait, it kind of communicates you expect to have an answer. And then he goes, I don't know. And it was just that opportunity to say, well, here's a couple options you have. And, like right in the air, like Katie Wood Ray said. But what struck me is that when I stand up, number one, 2 places from where he is a kid who's just looking at me and he's been listening to that whole conference. And that's where I'm going next. But because my lens is on the kid, it's now on learning. It's not on management. Of course, like any teacher, between conferences, I'm skimming the room like, oh, need to go there next. But I'm also now focused on, wait a minute, I wonder if other students are having trouble with endings. Is it a few students and I do a mini lesson with just a few kids in the back, a small group conference, or is it time for me to grab a couple mentor texts and show the possibilities of endings to the whole class? And I just was so struck that you are going to be focused on one or the other, depending on what you're doing with your time.
Well, I mean, you've said a whole lot there. One thing that I noticed that when you conferred with that kid, you kind of adopted that sort of writing project mantra of saying something positive to the kid and then kind of nudging the kid.
Yeah.
Like, I like this. Oh, this is good. This is a big idea. Oh, yeah, and generating a little bit of enthusiasm. And then kind of, well, so how you can end it. And so it's not just receiving the paper, which
Mm-hmm.
should be the first thing we do, right? Receive it somehow, but then somehow nudge it. And I've seen you, of course, confer with lots of writers, and one of your superpowers of many is you're very patient.
Hmm.
Like, you will ask a kid a question, and when the kid does not immediately answer, you're not entirely uncomfortable with that delay or wait time. And I know we were going to talk about this today, and I know you're going to talk a little bit maybe about the Don Murray
Oh,
speech that he gave in Iowa. But when I watched that speech in my writer's notebook, I kept 2 pages of notebooks on Don Murray. And one of the things he says down here one of the things he says in that speech that I wrote down here is, the student must discover how to solve their own writing problems.
mm-hmm.
And I think that silence of, well, what do you think? And I mean, I heard all of that in that just short little interaction, and what a difference that is between policing a classroom and doing that, one-to-one teaching.
I'm also struck, and I appreciate that you were so kind in your remarks. I always feel like a learner when I'm conferring. I never feel like I've got it. But I think one of the things that struck me is that there's kind of a movement in our work, in the work of teaching, that says that the teacher's supposed to know what she's going to do when she sits down to confer with a student. Like, ahead of time, like you've figured out there's a particular strategy or a skill you're going to teach, or there's a teaching point, and there's all this language to me that kind of disrupts for me the idea that you're sitting down to learn from the student. And in that learning, you're going to oftentimes go, oh, I know something I could help you with. But you're also trying to figure out what it is that they know and what they need to know, or what you need to affirm so they'll keep doing it. And I feel like one of the reasons people don't confer is because they feel like they'll get it wrong. Don't you think?
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that's why we try to move later toward, once kids are comfortable with us, and this comes back to the management issue too, because sometimes it takes a few weeks for kids to go, oh, this is the rhythm of this class. These
Yeah.
25 minutes I will be writing. And because I'm not answering the worksheet and because I'm not doing the packet work, the kids eventually get used to that rhythm. And then I find that the management, problems go away.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's eventually where we want our kids to pivot, so that when we sit down, it's not us directing the conference, it's the kid directing the conference. And so the kid doesn't just thrust the paper at you and say, hey, help. The kid says, I would like help with X, and teaching kids to do targeted response. And of course, we had to model how to do that when we had writing groups between our classes. You remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
You went online with your essay, and we all read it, and you said to my class, I need help with X. What do you think about X? And then I reciprocated with your classroom, and I said, I need help with Y, and your kids. And so we modeled that idea that it's not just a massive, thing, here's my essay, but that often we let the kid determine where the focus of that conference will be.
I would say we have to let them determine. And it's funny because, my great writing teacher, Don Murray, which the subtitle of this essential collection is Lessons from America's Greatest Writing Teacher. I
That's a
have,
lot to look up to.
I know he would have hated that. He was long gone when this was written. But in the back, I have in my notes, for some reason, I was holding this book instead of my conferring notebook, and I wrote down the notes for a conference in it. And just listen to this. I'm writing about my car. This is a kid named Spencer. I say, why? He says, because I love it. What do you love about it? It's rare. And I was just sitting there like, he goes, no one has one. I'm like, I knew what rare meant, but I just went like, huh. And then he goes, it makes me think about my mom. And then he goes, oh, you're good. You didn't do nothing. You just sat there and pulled this out of me. That car was my mom's, and now that she's gone, I feel closer to her when I'm driving it. My response was, well, I'm done here. That wasn't about like helping him with anything except, why are you writing this? And once you know that, it changes the piece entirely. Like, what really matters about this car? But in that, like, I think that this is what people tell me is that their principals, they're taking notes going, you didn't do anything, right? I didn't do anything there except just kind of wait. And I just feel like there's so much pressure on teachers to be experts, and you can't be with writing.
Well, I can't remember, was it Lucy's question? You know, say more. It's really about, okay, say more.
Say more about that. Her favorite phrase, say more about that. I was like, oh man, I got to use that. But here's the thing that I've been thinking about as we're talking is that the way you and I work together to write this book is that we've kind of established this rhythm, and I had to get over the fact that you were reading my writing. Kelly Gallagher, in all capital letters, was reading my writing, which was crappy, and I didn't want you to know that I wrote so crappy. And once I got over that, and that took a bit of my ego, then it became like I work on a chapter for a while, and then you work on it, and you work on a chapter for a while, and then I work on it. But when we confer in between, you know, like while we're both still working, you can never know exactly what I need help with. That only the writer
so
knows.
Interesting. It's so interesting that you said that, and I didn't know we were going to go here, but right now, as we're recording this, you and I are writing a new book.
Yeah.
And just yesterday, you're working on this chapter over here, and I'm working on this chapter over there. And just yesterday, as I was working on this thing and kind of shaping it, and I start to feel like, okay, maybe this is where it's going to go. I made a note in the side of the Google Doc. I need to talk to Penny here, and I need to talk to Penny here. But I didn't send you an email yesterday because I knew you were hiking with your family, and I wanted you to have the Sunday off. But I actually, as the writer, I know exactly the two spots where I want you to come in and give feedback. I mean, that literally happened yesterday. Yeah. And this is after we've already written a book together, and it's developing that sense where the writer gets a sense where he needs or she needs the coaching.
That is the essential piece you're giving people right there, is that we're trying to, with our students, develop the habit of analyzing their own writing and saying, this is where I could use some help right now. Because there is with any piece of writing, there are parts that you kind of know what to do to fix.
Right.
And there are parts when you're feeling like, I just can't get to what I'm trying to do. And somebody else could help me do that.
But often, you know, if you sit next to a kid and the kid just says blankly, help me with my paper, you know, the instinct is to pick up the paper, start looking at the entire paper, and as a teacher going, okay, I think this is where you need the most help.
Right.
And that may be, and you've said this in workshops we've done together, that may not be where the kid wants the help. That kid may be more focused on the conclusion or something else. And the act itself is so big, you're not going to solve all problems in one conference, right? So we zoom in on one thing, and that's the nudge that we want to leave the kid with.
Well, and I think we have to forgive ourselves that the thing we pick might be the wrong thing. You know, I think about, like, if the kid tells you I want help with this, and you give them a ton of help and walk away and they don't use any of it, and we feel like, ooh, I picked the wrong thing. I didn't help him. That doesn't necessarily mean that's not helping the writer over time. And I know that with the stuff that I wrote this morning. So I sent you a message that I'd been working for 2 grueling hours. And this is on the same chapter I've been on for a while now. And what happened today is I went down a rabbit trail and wrote really badly. So there is no way there's any little note in there, ask Kelly about this, because I don't even want you to know it's there. I hate that it's shared with you, because you could like get in that chapter and see it. But when I'm in that stage of the like blah vomit draft, I am not looking for help unless the help can help me figure out what I'm trying to say. Because then James Britton, right? Writing on a sea of talk, right? This talking through helps me write. So another reason to get kids to confer. But I also think the last piece we should maybe mention is that we work really hard to get our kids to have productive responses to each other's writing, to not edit each other's writing, but to be able to sit in a writing group and talk about their writing.
Right. I know neither one of us believe in peer editing, but we believe very strongly in peer response. And maybe we come back and go deeper on this another time, but in creating writing groups across our classrooms, I have my draft. There's 2 students in my classroom and 2 students in your classroom. So there's 5 of us in this circle. And I've distributed a copy of my essay or my writing to all 4 of us plus me. And now I'm going to get feedback from student 1, student 2, student 3, student 4. So I'm determining what that feedback will be. Hey, everybody, here's my essay, look at X. And that gives kids a lot of feedback that is, the teachers are unable. I can't do that. I can't give feedback to all those kids all the
Right.
time. So,
Right.
but I think we can teach kids to give feedback to one another that helps move their papers to better places. And so that's the first value of that. The second value of being in a group like that is then now I have to read this student's and give that student response. I have to read this student and give that student response. And so now I am swimming in everybody's essays and giving everybody's response. And it creates this bubble of peer response that I think is really, and I know you agree because you saw it happen when our classes commingled,
Yeah.
it's just beyond rich.
It is. And the other thing that we both noticed is that so they had writing group in class and then online. And sometimes in the same class, a kid would give feedback to another kid in my class that was richer than anything I'd heard in class because it was on Flipgrid. Because they were videotaping these responses, they had more to say. They stayed with their thinking across the country for sure, because my kids were like, well, I'm never going to see those kids, so I can be more honest. They were learning about feedback, how to give feedback, but it was better because it was across the country.
The irony is that the distance that's allowed by the technology creates a closeness that would not happen in the classroom. Kids will say things to a camera that they will not say to somebody they're sitting right next to, especially if they don't know them, right? So it almost frees them to give sort of more unfettered response to the drafts.
And I was so moved at the end. We said we wanted a final, sharing experience in December when my kids were leaving the class. And we asked them to share something they'd written in their notebook. And I just remember that so many kids read something that was powerful to them.
Yeah.
And the fact that they had come to a place in that short amount of time where they wanted to share something that was really important to them. And those sharing pieces were viewed so many times by other kids.
They were.
Yeah.
So isn't that interesting that we started this talk, kind of under the idea of teacher conferring, and then just through that discussion sort of segued into that whole idea, well, the things that we're doing with kids, we want to teach kids to do with one another, young writers to do with one another.
Yeah.
I'm wondering in most classrooms, I'm wondering when a kid writes a draft, where's the feedback? Not the grading. Where's the feedback? Where's the coaching coming from? And we both said this many times, if it comes when the paper's finished, it's too late. That this process with the teacher or with their peers needs to come mid-process. The kids need the nudge at halftime, not when the game is over.
Well, you think about assign, assess, that rhythm of writing in classrooms. That's not where the magic happens. The magic happens when they're in the midst of doing it. And that's when they really listen to us. They don't necessarily, the grade's done.
Right.
It's a powerful difference.
There's a big difference between, if I look at my job as an English teacher to simply decide who gets an A and who gets a B and who gets a C, then how I interact with your paper is very different than if my lens is what I write on your paper is going to help you make that paper better, right? And it changes what I say and it changes when I say it, right? And I think this shift from sort of end assessment to and end grading towards more mid-process is really an essential step for writing teachers.
It is. And I have to say, Kelly, I think if every teacher had a co-writer like you, pretty lucky, because you have taught me a ton.
Oh Oh my gosh.
Seriously.
We're going to have a 5-hour session later this week where I'll talk about Penny's influences on my
Right.
teaching. Now I think we should probably wrap this one up.
You know what? I wish everybody health and a good week ahead.
Yes, it's so good. We're glad you joined us again, and we look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow, everybody. Be well.
Bye, you guys.